This is Tell Me What to Read, the podcast of booktopia.com.au. I'm Nick Wasiliev, and for today's book discussion podcast, I'm joined by Jessica. Hello, Jess.
Hi.
Callum. Hello, Callum.
Hi, how's it going?
Very good, thank you. Lovely to have you here. And last of all, Sam. Morning.
Hey, Nick.
So let's dive right into it and talk about the books that we are reading and enjoying. And I will throw first to Callum. Callum, what have you been enjoying over the Christmas break?
I went through a few books over the Christmas break. I'm going to start with What I Wish People Knew About Dementia by Wendy Mitchell. Now, I read this book with the intention to learn a little bit more about the disease. Bit of background on me, I was the living carer for my grandmother who suffered from dementia in the later year of life. She's still well and she's still with us, but it definitely opened my eyes to how you perceive the disease and what people who are living with the disease actually can and cannot communicate, if that makes sense. So Wendy Mitchell worked for the NHS in the UK for her entire life. When she was 58, she was diagnosed with dementia, and this is actually her second book. So this book comes out the 1st of February, but essentially it is a fantastic book that is dedicated to kind of giving an inside scoop on how living with dementia is like. The book itself is structured into separate chapters. So you've got a chapter on senses, which goes into how people eat, what they eat, what affects them when they are choosing a meal. There's a whole chapter on how they boil an egg, stemming from situations of if they walk away, they can tend to forget that they're boiling an egg. They may set an alarm, but they may forget what the alarm is for. So it really goes into a thorough look in how people who live with dementia can live by themselves effectively, which from living with someone is definitely, it definitely opened my eyes to what the capabilities are. I think when you have a family member or a loved one with dementia, you instantly go to the mindset of it's really sad, it's got a stigma to it. You're seeing someone who was capable and looked after themselves and looked after you diminish back to that child form, back to that vulnerability. But the book itself is a fantastic insight into how dementia develops for different people. Specifically, one thing that really stood out was how housing itself can affect how the livelihood of dementia patients, specifically with the cognitive skills of seeing colour. The way she put it was majority of people living with dementia, no matter what the form, see things like a black and white movie. So if you've got a dark carpet and bright walls, but the dark carpet looks like a void, and that's why mobility and confidence with their own walking, especially when they get to that later stage in life where they need that bit of assistance, as my grandmother went through. It was really important for her to get that across to people. Wendy Mitchell has done some fantastic work. I definitely recommend, if you want to learn more about dementia, if you are struggling with understanding what it is like for a loved one that's going through it, or even if you're going through it yourself, it definitely gives a great insight into what the disease is like and what the stigma of it is like for people in the healthcare sector as well. A second book that I have to talk about today is a little bit of a different note. It's Hellship by Michael Veitch. Hellship is not a fantasy book. It's a historical retelling of the deadly journey from Liverpool, England to Port Phillip in 1852. So the story takes place on the Ticonderoga, which was an American clipper ship, 169 foot long. Back in the 19th century, this clipper ship was the fastest thing on the water. There were many in operation. Essentially, the voyage itself is a retelling from Michael Veitch's great-great-grandfather, James William Henry Veitch, who was the newly appointed medical practitioner on the ship itself. The story itself gives a really thorough overview and recount of the happenings of the ship. So originally in 1852, the ship that was recommended to house 630 passengers took off with 795. Unfortunately, over the 90 days that took place thereafter and the recount within the story, 100 people died from typhus, which meant as soon as it hit Port Phillip Bay, it put up the yellow mask and was then a news headline that typhus had come and hit Melbourne. This then transpired to another 68 people dying of typhus, and is a fantastic recount of how Australia, especially Port Phillip in the time, reacted to it. There is still an area of Port Phillip Bay and the beach area that's dedicated to a quarantine area. This area has a heritage stone and is notified for the many, many cases of people that died there. Many of them were unnamed, unfortunately, just because of the time and how the records were kept as well. So if you are into a bit of a historical recount and something that's a little bit close to Australia, then I can definitely recommend that one.
So the variety of books you've been on has been interesting. I wouldn't see you going towards a story like Hellship. I love that there's a lot of fantastic stories out there about, you know, those ships in the early days. Like, you have to think of the Batavia as like a kind of almost one of those horror stories. Why? I'm very curious as to why you were so interested in this, in Hellship. Like, because it seems it's such a interesting book to choose as your summer reading.
Well, actually, it kind of stems from, I've read Devotion, and that does also have another kind of tie-in with Plague on a Ship. So I definitely wanted a bit more of a historical recount. So when I saw that one, the name itself was great, but when I started doing a bit more research into it and trying to get sort of my head wrapped around what the living conditions were, and not having it from a kind of fiction standpoint, but more of a retelling standpoint, it definitely goes into detail. Like the amount of, you could almost smell the typhus with the way that he goes into detail of how things are going. So if you're not into a gruesome kind of retelling, probably not the best book to read, but it was definitely fascinating and definitely gave me a little bit more respect for anyone with ancestors who came over when there wasn't a Jetstar lounge and Qantas didn't have first class.
Yeah, it definitely would be one for historical buffs and such. Great books, Callum. Like I love as well the Wendy Mitchell book as well. Like the one word I was just thinking as you were describing it to me was just timely. I reckon this would be something that a lot of people would want to know about, kind of to breaking that stigma around dementia as well. Fantastic recommendations, kicking us off with a bang. I'm going to now move over to Jess. Jess, I know you've had the chance to have a bit of a break as well over Christmas. What did you get up to, and what did you enjoy reading over the Christmas break?
Yeah, so I read loads over Christmas. The first book that I want to tell you about is Isabel Allende's new book, Violetta, which comes out on the 25th January. It's an amazing story about a woman who is born in 1920, just as the Spanish flu is arriving on the shores of South America. And it tells her story via letters that she is writing to her grandson right up until the outbreak of COVID in 2020. So it's over 100 years, bookended with 2 pandemics, which is pretty fascinating. It's a story of love and loss and relationship, and it was just such a lovely book, all about sort of aging and how those relationships that you have change. And she's obviously lived through some pretty amazing historic moments throughout her life as well. You know, things like women getting the vote and women's rights, and how she played a part in all of that. As well as a lot of the sort of rise and fall of governments and dictatorships throughout Chile's history as well. So yeah, thoroughly recommend. Really enjoyed it.
I'm sensing like a disease theme that's coming up in this podcast.
Wasn't deliberate. But following with the disease theme, I was unlucky enough to get COVID over my Christmas break. So yeah, I managed to get Christmas Day with some friends, but caught it quite quickly afterwards. So found myself stuck at home for a week and was like, okay, so what am I going to read? I'm not feeling great. I don't want anything particularly taxing. I definitely don't want anything that is going to be horrifying or plunge me into more mental instability. So what am I going to read? So I turned to BookTok, where all inspiration comes from, and BookTok told me to read the A Court of Thorn and Roses series. So I went into it pretty dubious. I was like, I'm not going to enjoy this. This is probably not going to work out for me, but pretty much everyone's read it, so I was like, okay, I'm going in. And I'm addicted. I have a problem. So I read the first one, and then I was like, okay, well, now I need to find out what happened. So I read the second one, and then I read the third. And then S.J. Mars wrote a little Christmas novella, so I read that as well. And then I read.
Oh my god!
So I literally read all 4.5 books.
And they're chunky
in my
books.
isolation. Yeah, they're chunky, and you know I love a chunky book. And I don't really know what to say about it other than you have to leave all feminist morals at the door, because every man is tall, dark, hamstered, and rippled with muscles and growls in your ear, which I just feel like, are we still on that? But apparently we are, and actually turns out I'm totally here for it, which is even more embarrassing. And so the first book, it starts off around a young girl who's trying to keep her family alive by hunting for meat in a forest. They're very, very poor, and she accidentally, deliberately kills a fairy in wolf form, skins him alive. Oh, sorry, no, he's dead. Skins him, takes his pelt back to her forest home, and then is dragged away for that murder. And it's kind of a sort of Beauty and the Beast, Hades and Persephone kind of retelling. How many times an author can get the enemy to lovers trope into a series? I think this has to be a record. But if you like it, then yeah, it's great. There's some great one-line quotes in there. There's the exploration of kind of relationships and what it is to be good and what it is to be evil, and especially in the most recent book, which is a Court of Silver Flame. They're all a court of something. There's quite an interesting look at kind of self-esteem and how that affects mental health and things like that. So it kind of does get a little bit political. It's not completely airy-fairy, deliberate pun. But yeah, highly addictive, and my new guilty pleasure.
Are you going to read the other series?
Okay,
Jess, are you going to read the next series, the Crescent City one?
Yeah, so I also then, off the back of this, I'd started her A Throne of Glass series as well, and got maybe 2 or 3 books in and then left it. And having stormed through the ACOTAR series, I then finished the Throne of Glass series, which was about another 4 books. And I haven't picked up the Crescent City series yet, but with the next one out in about a month's time, I think I might pick that one up in February.
She's been steamrolling through so many books at the moment, Sarah J. Maas, and people are loving her for it. I think sticking with the theme of whenever you come on the pod, we do a tagline. You have a perfect tagline for it. I love the idea of the industry review from Jessica Paul is, I am addicted, I have a problem.
Yeah, I really do. It's all the things that I don't stand for outside of the book world. And now I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. Fine, if he's going to growl in my ear, I'm for it. Okay.
There's no such thing as a guilty pleasure. Just
You know
enjoy what you read.
Yeah, you're so right. And we do need to kind of dismantle this idea of a guilty pleasure. And yeah, maybe I need to just kind of say it loud and proud. I'm here for it. Give me an enemy to lovers trope, please. More. Also, how do you find those in real life? Like, do you just put a call out to be like, hey, does anybody want to become my nemesis so I can fall in love with them later? Like, is that a thing? I can feel some form of epic Tinder bio coming on.
Yeah, I can. I'm like, if you can, you probably like you can do some sort of. The only one I'm thinking of, and I feel bad for saying it, is like Parks and Rec, where like Ben was hated initially by Leslie Knope, and then she fell in love with him. So maybe it's just like relationship stuff in general.
Yeah.
Amazing recommendations, and I love the fact that you have smashed through pretty much all of Sarah J. Maas in no time at all. Thank you so much, Jess.
Don't forget what COVID does for you.
So before we move on to Sam, our final guest, to talk about the book that she's been reading and enjoying, we actually have a sponsor this week. Yes, we have a sponsored book, and our sponsored book of the week is John Dale's Detective Work. When Dimitri Telegonis is promoted to the Serious Unsolved Crime Unit to investigate the disappearance of a beautiful blonde escort, he thinks he's finally made the big time. He'd always wanted to do detective work and thought it was his destiny. But things quickly start to unravel. His assigned partner is an uninterested dinosaur, and when progress in the investigation is slow, the bosses threaten to pull the plug. Desperate to crack his first cold case, Dimitri tracks down the prime suspect, only to find that there are forces at play when a naive young detective cannot fully understand. This is a fantastic book from John Dale, Detective Work, and it is our sponsored book of the week for Tell Me What to Read. Links are listed in the description. All right, last but certainly not least, Sam, what have you been enjoying over the Christmas break?
So the first book I actually read over the Christmas break and completed on New Year's Eve, it was something that I started, took me a little while to get into, and then once I got through the first couple of chapters and was in the right headspace to read it, I just blasted through it in like 3 days. And that was the book 138 Dates by Rebecca Campbell. Now, I wouldn't normally call myself a nonfiction reader, although I have been reading a lot more nonfiction recently, but I was really fascinated by the premise of this book, which is Rebecca's it's a true story. She's a Sydney-based, or at the time she was a Sydney-based entrepreneur. And this is the story of, it's sort of got two sides. It's her chasing her goal of finding a life partner and settling down and getting married, having a family, while at the same time she's building her business, and going through all the steps of being a CEO and getting funding and all that sort of stuff. So I think for me, it was really fascinating to see, the stories of the business side of being a woman in business, being a woman entrepreneur, and going through the steps of how do you take something from an idea to getting the funding, to running a team, to creating a business. And there's some really fascinating business sort of points and learnings that come through. But on the other side of it was her, and I don't know how she did this, she went on 138 dates over the course of, I think, like 4 years. And that's a lot.
Yeah, it is. I was like, what? That's insane.
And it was really fascinating to me because she's talking about places in Sydney that I can recognise. And I really admire her and respect her because she had a plan. She had like a lead generation flow of how do you get someone from a date lead to going on an actual date. And she had a spreadsheet. That's how she knew it was 138. And I really just respect that a lot. She had a plan and she went through it. And there were some really interesting learnings as well, because she would call up these men that she, might have had a date with and, ask them, why didn't it work out? Why didn't you ask me for a second date? What from your perspective went wrong? So she was getting feedback and some of them responded, and you see it in the book. And it was kind of a really interesting insight into, the male mind and kind of what works and what doesn't in kind of this interesting social thing that we do as human beings. So that was really interesting to me. And there's a fantastic ending and it's really uplifting and I almost cried, and it's a really good book.
Oh, sounds
Highly
lovely.
recommended.
I'm so fascinated how she managed to get so many dates in. Like was she like, I'm just going to dedicate this whole weekend to dating and I'm going to do a breakfast date, a second breakfast date, a brunch date, a lunch date, a dinner date? Like, how did she do it?
She started off with wanting to do 1 date a week for a year. And then she also said that if she couldn't go on a date because she was busy or sick, she had to make up for it. So there were weeks where she'd go on 2 or 3 if she had to make up dates. And it's a numbers game. She was getting her leads and investigating.
I really like the idea that she was treating it like a business. It was like, okay, the more you get in, the more chance you get of converting those leads to a sale.
Yeah.
I was also going to just say, God help her trying to figure out how the men's brain works, because because I can't even manage
Well,
that.
that's why she asked them, you know.
And what kind
She
of feedback
talks
did
to a
you
lot of
get?
different people. Things like I think I remember she was talking to a barman, you know, about why she wasn't getting second dates from her. I think it was like a Tinder bio or something, and the guy says to her, "Oh, you know, well, your bio says that, you know, you're just here for a fun time. It doesn't say you're looking for a relationship." And she's like, "Okay, cool. So I need to change, you know, my bio to make it clear what I'm expecting so that I can match with the people who are aligned with that." And also things like, "Oh, well, these are the sorts of things that if you're on a date with a man, these are the signs that they're looking for to show your interest." And she wasn't doing those things, and that's why they were assuming, okay, this person's so interested, you know. So yeah, it was really, really interesting. Her process was interesting, but also her way of just flat out asking people for feedback and trying to learn from it because she had a goal in mind was really, really, yeah, inspirational. So yeah, that was the book I finished on New Year's Eve. And then in the spirit of New Year, New You, because it is featured in New Year, New You, I started reading Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. This is not her most recent book. Her most recent book is Atlas of the Heart, which I have seen a physical copy of it. It is gorgeous. But this book was recommended to me a while ago, and my New Year's resolution was to go through my TBR pile and only read from that to try and clear it. And so I started reading this, and I got to say, like, Brené Brown is not overhyped. You know, she's an incredibly talented, fairly prolific author, and I was really, really impressed with this book. I'm about halfway through it at the moment, but I'll probably finish it over the next few days. I really love her style of writing. It's very conversational. It's very easy to understand. It's very easy to grasp. And what most impresses me is that she's very honest. I wouldn't say she's brutally honest. She's gently honest with herself. She refers to her own mistakes and what she did, and she refers to parts of herself and her history that she has changed. And she's completely honest about it. I really, really respect that a lot. And I think that it comes through that she's not the type of the person to write, you know, those books where they sort of say, I'm perfect and I have achieved X, Y, Z, and here's how you can do it. If you wake up at 3 a.m. and have cold showers and are a millionaire, you too can be like me. She's on the journey with you. She's open about her mistakes and about her learnings, and she's really just sharing her insights from her many years of research. She's a doctor as well, so this is her life's work. And yeah, just really, really impressed with her style of writing and some really, really great insights. And I think that even if you don't consider yourself a leader, it's definitely worth picking up. There's a quote from it which I think might change people's minds about whether or not this book is relevant to them, which is, a leader is anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes and has the courage to develop that potential. So you don't need to be a CEO. You don't need to be the manager of a team with 20 people. I think that most people can relate to that. And when you read this book, you know, it almost makes you really self-interrogate yourself and how you see yourself and the things that you do. And it really challenges you to be more vulnerable, but also set boundaries and really work in a way that, or move through the world and your interactions with other people in a different way. There's this really cool quote that I just want to pull out. I actually folded the page. Sorry, everyone who hates that, last night. So it's something that she's quoting from her previous book, which is about wholeheartedness and this whole thing about daring to lead with vulnerability, with wholeheartedness. And she's quoting a previous book called The Gift of Imperfection. And I think that in this life and in this new world of pandemic season 3, this is something that I hope and I think could resonate with a lot of people, which is what is wholeheartedness? It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. It's going to bed and thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but that doesn't change the truth that I am brave and worthy of love and belonging. And I just was like, I just wanted to hug the book because I was just like, thank you, Brene.
Sounds just
That
like,
was just
woo! Yeah, I love it.
beautiful. It's beautiful. She has this gorgeous way of writing. Everyone needs a Brene Brown in their corner, you know, a Dr. Brene Brown. So yeah, I'm gonna be using that, and definitely, I think this is a beautiful book that's accessible but so useful. Read for everyone.
I do. I from all the books that I've seen Brené Brown put out, like, she is learning things as much as you are, because so many of these books, like, often like books around self-help and management of the self, can often be like, here's this person who is speaking from point Z, talking to you at point A. Here's how you get to be like me. Noticed it with when because I mean, Atlas of the Heart has been huge. It's been our number one for several weeks now, and just hearing about that was amazing. So to hear about this book as well, and the fact that it's also her story as well about what she discovers, I think maybe sounds like it hits a lot harder than most books around kind of managing and looking after yourself. Amazing recommendation, Sam. Absolutely love it. Thank you, Sam, and thank you all of you. These books have been great. I'm liking the mindset of where all of you have been in at the moment. Some have been escaping to fantasy, some have been escaping to typhus-ridden ships, and some have been escaping to self-help and managing themselves. I love it. I love where all your heads are at. So you can check out all of the books that we have talked about today in the description, and I'll be listing them down there. But if you're looking for books in general, we have this amazing website called booktopia.com.au. There are millions, and I mean millions, of titles there on site, whether it be ebooks, normal books, what have you. We have got it. Go check it out. There are lots of books to spend. There are a lot of books for you to buy. Spend your money. Help keep us in business. Help keep this podcast running. It's the ultimate place to go, your one-stop shop for books. Please join us next week as we sit down for a YA extravaganza with Amy Kaufman, Megan Spooner, and Vanessa Len as our next episode. But as always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you very much to all of my guests for their book recommendations for this week. And as always, never stop reading.